All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is the first part of a new webinar series we're developing under University of California Ag and Natural Resources and Cooperative Extension. We're doing this in partnership with the Western Regional Development Center, Center for Regional Change, and a few other groups that are working with us as well. Title is Community Economic Development Innovations for a Post-Pandemic Economy. This is the first of 5, and today we're going to be setting up the challenges facing us as we're looking at economic development after the pandemic. So today's agenda, here's how it's going to be structured. Why do we need innovations in economic development? Then we'll have the webinar presentation by Professor Martin Kenney. He'll go on for 30 to 40 minutes. We'll follow up with question and answer with Professor Kenney. And then we'll briefly discuss the next webinar. So briefly, for those of you that aren't aware, I am with UC Davis and Cooperative Extension. Cooperative Extension brings the university to our California and national communities. We cover a broad range of issues and topics. For me, I'm Keith Taylor. I'm an economic development faculty member at UC Davis in Cooperative Extension. In other university systems, you might know me as an extension professor. We just use a different title here in the University of California. Before COVID, my work was addressing a significant amount of structural changes in the economy, most of which don't bode well for working class, rural, and marginalized communities. Now, that said, first I want to give a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion within this series. It is our intention to represent the rich tapestry of communities that UC Cooperative Extension and university extensions throughout the USA serve. You'll note that in our initial launch, representation is not evident, but while there have been extenuating circumstances, going forward in future iterations, we'll absolutely have a representative group of presenters so that stakeholders feel seen, represented, and included. In the meantime, I want to point everyone that's in this webinar to a number of resources regarding the UC's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You'll find them here. All these presentations we will have recorded. They will be available online through the UC A&R website, just so you're aware. So first, the focus here, what we're doing in this webinar series is discussing the challenges of economic development in our current climate, but also what are the opportunities that are out there. So while today is going to be kind of problem-centric, the remaining webinars are going to be solutions-oriented. The pandemic has clearly ushered in a number of structural changes in our economy. Many political commentators have stated that things will never go back to normal, but I question whether or not that's true. Yes, there's been permanent structural changes, but a lot of those have been evident for a number of years. Early in the pandemic, we saw there was a significant drop-off in GDP and unemployment. There was especially a drop-off in the hospitality sector, where a number of restaurants closed. Yet despite all that, Wall Street thrives. So what's going on and what we're doing in our economic development? With that, the platform economy continues to boom. I don't know about you all, but for me early on, I had a bunch of Amazon boxes that were building up outside of my door. Jeff Bezos, through this, has become one of the wealthiest men. He has become the wealthiest man in the world, worth over 180 billion. And the gig economy continues to grow with things like DoorDash and Instacart and these other areas. So what's on the other side of this pandemic, right? Well, let's call this our economic development toolbox. It's clear that we're playing with just a handful of tools in this diverse economic development toolbox. Economic development right now ends up being a process of empowering the already powerful to take care of the rest of us. What is it that we can be doing to help out our local communities? So my work is about re-envisioning how we do economic development, so specifically by focusing on community wealth building. The great thing is we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We have models that exist and they're all at arm's length that are out there. This series here is to educate, further creative solutions, and connect. So just so you're aware, here's the upcoming presenters for the webinar. Obviously today we have Professor Kenney. In the coming weeks, we'll have Matt Kropp. We'll have Kevin Short, Patrick Nangle, and Michaela Fenton. They're going to be covering areas of transportation, community finance, utilities, and housing. So all areas that are really important right now in this particular moment of our society. So for those of you that are watching, just how can you participate today? First, know that for the next 30 to 40 minutes, Professor Kenney is going to be presenting. But while he's presenting, feel free to ask questions in the comment bar down below. So just type in the Q&A. A moderator will read them and we'll reserve them for the speaker. So Professor Kenney won't be engaging while he's doing the lecture. But afterward, in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we will be addressing the questions and answers. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Professor Kenney to begin his presentation. So Martin, on to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thanks again, Keith and A&R for inviting me to speak in this important webinar series. I'm going to talk today about research I've been doing on what I term the platform economy. And I will argue that these platform firms are reshaping our economy. And by our economy, I mean the global economy. China, of course, having its own platform firms. Entrepreneurship, what it is to be a business today in a world that's increasingly structured by platforms, and the impact on consumer behavior. So we are, my argument, and this I've made this with John Zeisman and other colleagues, is that crises are change periods. In 1929, 1945, you had the Great Depression, you had GM, Ford. In Germany, you had Volkswagen, the Autobahn, that was Hitler's solution. We had a mass consumption, mass production society. Some people have called it Fordism. That was the FDR solution. 1974, 1980, we had another crisis. And then 2008, 2009, we had a crisis. And since that crisis, platform firms have become a focus of power in this society. And I'll present some slides that will sort of try to convince you that this is true. And then I will start to talk about the implications of this power shift that has been so profound and has been accelerated by COVID. So let me just get into this. First of all, I don't call this a sharing economy. Nothing is being shared. Well, perhaps you're sharing your data. Maybe Uber, the person is giving you a ride, that individual is not sharing anything. They're being paid through Uber. And we can talk about the power we will talk about the power that's inherent in every platform, be it Uber, Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. So we are in a reorganization of the global economy as these platform owners, particularly those of the mega platforms, are becoming nearly all-powerful. They are today regulators. They regulate what's happening, who can say what on Facebook, and to some degree, we want them to regulate. We don't want child porn being fed to us, et cetera, but they can regulate anything that is on their platform because it's private property. They are now infrastructure in the same way as public utilities are infrastructure, electric, et cetera. You have to have internet access. Amazon delivers 50% of basically everything that's sold on the internet goes through Amazon today. So it is becoming the infrastructure for commerce. Google is the infrastructure for search. If you cannot be found on Google search, you don't exist. If you get wiped off Google Maps, your store gets wiped off Google Maps, you don't exist. Today's young people with their smartphone will be looking for an Italian restaurant, and there'll be one right in front of them. And if it's not on the Google Maps, they'll walk down the block to the Italian restaurant. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, but if you think about the truth of how you and I, and particularly my students who are 20, 21, 22-year-olds, how they use the phone is the center of their life, with the computer as another center of their life. And everything done on a platform is converted into data to be exploited. As you click through Amazon, Amazon is recording what you click, what you look at, and then as you've noticed, that ad follows you across the net, right? It is the panopticon of Jeremy Bentham or Michel Foucault. So how how powerful and systemically important are these firms? Well, you take right here, this is a little bit dated, this is last year. Chrome claims to have over 2.5 billion users. Android is somewhere around 2.5 billion. YouTube is about 2 billion users. And let's assume that it's exaggerated and it's only 1 billion. And there are 8 billion people in the world, more or less 8.5. Subtract off the Chinese, which do not allow American platforms into the country. And you've got more or less 7 billion, of which, let's say 1 billion, 15, 18% of all human beings on the planet are touched by the platforms. Facebook claims 2.41 billion, whatever, it doesn't matter. Say it's a billion. WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, these are billions of people. The Mac iOS is 900 million to a billion, right? And all of those are captives within the Apple platform ecosystem. And we can go down Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. Reddit with 330 million. This is reach that we've never seen before in history. And how quickly was it built? Well, let's say more or less 2000 to 2021 in 20 years, right? Think about that. How long did it take to build out the interstate highway system? How long did it take to build out the utility system, the electric utility system, the water systems? I mean, these are generations. This has all happened in one generation. So when we think about that, we can see the momentum and power of these platforms. And the stock market understands this. I'm sorry, I didn't change the date. I changed the valuations. I didn't change the date. It was, that's April 2021. Apple is over $2 trillion firm. Microsoft is another platform firm. Those are all in red. And you can see in the green are the Chinese platform firms. And you can see in 1955, we had General Motors, Exxon, US Steel, General Electric, Chrysler, Gulf Oil, Mobil, DuPont, a varied economy. These are the most valuable top 10 firms globally. I'm using only the United States in 55. In 2002, you had Microsoft, a platform firm, and then you had a variety. You had oil, you had pharma, you had Walmart. Fast forward to today, and Berkshire Hathaway, Visa, which is a kind of a platform, and JP Morgan, the biggest bank, are the most valuable firms in the world. This is incredible that just a small set of firms are so valuable. They're about 22% of the total US stock market valuation. Never has it ever been so high before. And many of these are owned largely or controlled by a few individuals. So what is the reality of a platform organized market? Well, first of all, right, we have power. And the platform has all the power. As you're on the platform can kick you off, can serve you, give you whatever you want, and observe all of your activities, your click stream. And so governance, and this is governance in a platform world, what you do is governed. It's not governed by the government, but it's governed by the platform, right? It can surveil everything that happens. Every transaction, every click is surveilled. And its decision-making is unilateral, shaped usually by algorithmic analysis. So when you wonder why Facebook creates, to some degree, extremism, it's because the algorithm serves what you show it that you want. And most of us want to be energized, and anger is an energizing force. So the platform is, in this sense, the platforms are increasingly the worlds we live in, and COVID obviously increased our use of the platforms. So what do they mean for local economic development? Well, they provide local business with enormous new opportunities, But with this come uncertainties, and there are a set of papers I have on what I call platform-dependent entrepreneurship. One was published in the Sloan Management Review last month that starts to discuss the problems that happen when a firm is dependent on a platform or platforms, right? So even think about, I give the example of UC Davis. He's not a firm, but what if Google decided to remove UC Davis from all searches? If you searched for UC Davis, you would get UC Berkeley, you would get Stanford, you would get this, but you would no longer get UC Davis. How big a hit would that be to UC Davis when no prospective students could find it, no vendors, anyone could find it on Google? It wouldn't exist, basically, right? That's, that is power like governments of closing a shop down, but it's private power. It basically will close you down. Okay, so I already said this, does a business exist if it cannot be found in Google search? Can a restaurant be found if it's not on Google Maps? Can a hotel or airline exist if it's not on Booking, Expedia, and Google? Does a business have to sell on Amazon? Increasingly, businesses are feeling like they have to sell on Amazon. Well, once you have to do something, the power is with whomever you have to do it through. And of course, we have new disruptive businesses, many of which, as many scholars have pointed out, don't seem to obey local laws, right? Airbnb, Uber, etc. But even a Google, do they have to obey local laws? Hard to say, right? So this is the kind of and simultaneously you're being integrated into their world. So what does this mean for entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship in a platform economy. Platforms call into question our understanding of entrepreneurship, because increasingly local businesses are very dependent upon the platforms. If you're a small business, your business is now dependent on the platform. Let me give you an example. If you don't advertise on Google, when somebody searches for your business, right? Martin Kenney's Plumbing. I'm not advertising on Google. Keith Taylor's Plumbing could put an advertisement at the top of that search. So they might decide, okay, I'll go with Keith Taylor. So what is Keith Taylor Plumbing? So what does that mean to Martin Kenney? You search for Martin Kenney, but Keith has kind of snuck in on top. I have to advertise to make sure that Keith is not advertising that spot. Right? That's a taxation on local business. And this is happening across the country. For local business services, 70% of local business service, local business, service business is done through Google search. You find the vendor through Google search. Right? So these are the kinds of things that are happening that are taxing local businesses. So, right? Well, what do platforms? They do good things for businesses, right? They make entrepreneurship easier than ever. Access to massive markets. You can be a local business. Now you can go to on Amazon, or you can advertise on Google and sell to anyone in the world. They give you resources. It's easy to, if you wanted to start selling on Amazon, you could probably, in the time of our webinar, you could probably for the first set up your Amazon business and start selling something on it. They provide training, reputational security. One reason we go to Amazon is because we believe that in some ways, Amazon has a good reputation, and so we won't be cheated, right? And they provide these ranking and reputation systems, the stars and all of that. So it actually lowers entry cost barriers, as does Uber. If you want to drive for Uber, it's pretty fast. You can get on there and start driving very quickly because it's all algorithmically generated. Well, what does that mean? It means ease of entry. It means you can start driving Uber and make money very quickly. Now, of course, once you're on Uber, Uber controls you, right? They can change how much you get for a fare. They can cheat you, as some of them have, like DoorDash has cheated its drivers out of tips. But anyway, you can enter very quickly. So on the flip side, as we think about entrepreneurship, we think about local businesses. What is entrepreneurship when your profit margins can be disrupted unilaterally by a platform? Amazon can change your profit margins, how much it charges you, unilaterally at any time it wishes. The more egregious examples are, of course, of DoorDash stealing the tips without even telling the drivers that they had a tip, just took the tips. And this is all documented, right? There's been FTC investigations. I'm not making this up. This is documented. I can give you the documentation. When your shop can be closed at any time. Amazon can at any time decide you violated the rules, the terms and conditions of selling on Amazon and close your shop. And if you don't like it, who do you go to get if it's a mistake, rectified? You go to Amazon. They're the judge, jury, and executioner. And they can take as much time as they want, sort of almost like Kafka's K, waiting for the court to make a decision that you have no impact on at all. In fact, if you're a large vendor on Amazon, you pay a monthly fee to be able to talk to someone at Amazon about why a product has been disallowed or et cetera. So you actually pay a fee to get justice. And when your discoverability of your shop is always at risk. At any time, Amazon can rate you up or down. Increasingly, Amazon will ask you to advertise. If you advertise on Amazon, you can get into the buy box at the top, right? If you've noticed the changes in the Amazon web page, right? When you go shopping, if you noticed, it used to be, it was lowest cost and they were just listed like that. And now things are changing and the order is not by cost anymore. That's because Amazon is tweaking it to extract more value from all of the vendors, to squeeze the profit out of the vendors. And of course, as an entrepreneur, one of the things you always tell people in business is know your customer. I gotta know your customer. How do you know your customer if you're selling through Amazon? You can't know your customer. Amazon doesn't want you to know your customer. Otherwise, you will disintermediate Amazon, right? So the platform is this intermediary between buyers and sellers, or even advertisers and users, right? A YouTube and the creators. The platform is always in between and has interests in keeping everything as opaque as possible so that it can play all sides against each other to extract value. Because, right, these are private enterprises. Their goal is to extract value. Okay, so the missing dimension is the dimension of power, right? And only recently, right, yesterday there was hearings on Lena Khan, who's one of the first critics of Amazon that wrote a very important Yale Law School article, is being considered to be on the FTC to sort of take on big tech. And if you watch the hearings, it was so interesting because both Republicans and Democrats said they look forward to working with her, right? And she's kind of been a radical on big tech, but now as people truly understand the power that these firms have, we're starting to get pushback, not only here, but also in the European Union, as people starting to finally grasp the kind of power. This is power like Standard Oil, but probably even more pervasive, because what we do on platforms now is so intimate to who we are as people. So, we can think about the local economic development implications that we've already seen. Newspapers, local newspapers, they've almost been destroyed, right? Craigslist started this, but they've almost been wiped out. Commercial real estate, retail in shopping centers is dying to be replaced by warehouses delivering from Amazon, right? So we're going to see the geographic configuration of how commerce is in our towns, cities, local jurisdictions is being reshaped. Walmart did that, of course, to some degree, but at least to some degree, Walmart hired, greeters, et cetera, et cetera. And you got the tax base. Now with Amazon, things are changing again, and even the Walmarts are threatened. Broadcasting. Today, news is through Facebook and Google. Commercial broadcasting is dying. The television broadcasting, CBS, NBC, they're dying. As everything's being rerouted through Facebook, Google, YouTube, Netflix, et cetera, et cetera. Restaurants. Today, restaurants have to pay to be found. Use DoorDash for delivery. If you actually look at what DoorDash charges the restaurant can't make any money if you use DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever, right? That money's all being extracted by that platform intermediary. Yelp is the same, right? And there's a lot of FTC cases where, and I won't go into them, where Yelp has been charged with egregious activities. Car dealership. Today, the internet salesperson at the car dealership sells most of the cars. And that then will shift employment and car dealerships and how much money car dealerships make, et cetera, as the platforms start to intermediate. So when you go online and you search for, and you want to buy a new or used car, and you go to that website to get some bids, right? The local car dealership has to pay. Now, of course, it had to pay for retail yellow pages or classifieds also, but it's paying more and more the percentage. And so therefore their profit percentage is being squeezed, right? Well, what does this mean? This means that the global platforms are sucking up money from all of the local, right? Pulling it up through advertisement, through all of this, and extracting it from the local community, right? Repairs is the same thing. Google Maps, Google Guaranteed. I can go into all of this. But what this means is that the local is being meshed even more by the platforms because we use them. And of course we use them. They're convenient. I mean, I use them. We all use them. But we have to think about what that means for the total value created by society and who captures it and who doesn't. And then when you consider what COVID did, it is no wonder that Jeff Bezos has become wealthier than ever, that the owners of Google, the founders, who are great entrepreneurs, of course, have become wealthier than ever. So these are issues that we at the local level, and those of us who are interested in local, need to think about, because the wealth is being extracted, pulled out nationally. Here I use the example of Google Guaranteed. If you want a service, let's say plumbing, right? You go to Google, you search for plumber near me. And then this might be what comes up. You've got organic search with Yelp down below, down here. You have regular organic search, but these are aggregators. Then you have Google Maps. Then you have the Google Ads up here. And now you have this new service called Google Guarantees. It's a really interesting service because with Google guarantees the repairs by these folks up to $2,000. They're in a sense solving the problem of the shady locksmith who, because of Google, got on there and they weren't even a good locksmith. They're solving the problem with Google Guaranteed. The Google Guaranteed vendors through Google are guaranteed. They pay Google for this, and when you go through them for this, to get a service, you go through here. They pay Google. It's like an advertisement, right? Now, what's so interesting? What happens if you complain to Google about the service that 129 Plumbing up here gave you? Does Google give you the $2,000 right away? Or do they contact 129 Plumbing and say, if you don't make Martin happy, you're out of Google guaranteed? What is that 129 plumber, what are he or she going to do? They're going to fix it for me. Google doesn't have to pay, right? Because otherwise they're out, right? So you can see this power, and you can see how Google Guarantee is actually extending Google's power further down in, because it's more expensive for that plumber to do Google Guaranteed than it is to do the advertisements, right? Solves your problem. You don't get a bad plumber anymore because Google makes sure. On the other hand, Google has extended its power further down. This is more powerful than the Better Business Bureau, right? Complain to the Better Business Bureau, what happens? Nothing. Complain to Google Guaranteed, and something happens, because the big boys on the block, right? Not, Better Business Bureau, or not even, you complain to the city of Davis and it takes 6 months and then you never get anything out of it. Now, Google makes sure things work. Okay, so I'm going to conclude here to open it up for questions, but there's so many ramifications of this that I can't get through it in 20 or 30 minutes, right? So local businesses can go global. This is a great thing, right? You have a new market, the global market. But these platforms are owned by profit-seeking entities. They want to increase their profits. However, right, they are infrastructure in the same way as the public utility, right? So like the public utility, they could raise your electric bill more and more and more, and you'd have to pay it as long as you wanted electricity, right? But we regulate them as infrastructure. We have Public Utilities Commission, whether it works well or not, it's there. You can complain to them. And they are a government entity, so you will get fair treat, you will get procedural justices at a minimum, right? They have inexorable motivation to grow in scale and scope. What does that mean? That means Amazon, right, started in books. Now you can buy anything on Amazon. You can buy music on Amazon. You have fulfillment by Amazon, all of those Amazon trucks running around here. Now, I'm not going to talk about how they treat their labor. We could go there too, right? Because they are profit-seeking entities, right? So they use temporaries, et cetera, to bring their cost of labor down. But they grow in scale and scope. You start Facebook, and then you have Instagram, and you have WhatsApp, and you have the Facebook ad network. Facebook is also growing. It's not as inexorable growth perhaps as Google, right? You use Google Maps, Google Drive, Google Gmail, Google YouTube, and I can search, blah, 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 right? So platforms are centralized entities. They can cross-subsidize, they can give you something for free to get the money back over here, et cetera, et cetera. And they operate by taxing the connections that they make. That's what they do. Either advertising, e-commerce sales, and then they get a percentage, subscriptions. There are many different ways, but they all are built on extracting value, and they transfer that value to the center. We in California are blessed in the sense by having these platforms located here, because the wealth is all transferred here, and then it helps our tax base. On the other hand, because the employees of these firms do so well, they drive real estate prices up in the Bay Area, et cetera, et cetera. Qualcomm is a platform down in San Diego, right? So in many respects, today, the local is largely powerless versus the dominant platforms without some sort of outside support, like the federal government stepping in and starting to regulate them, as is happening now or in countries around the world, as they look at what's happening to their newspapers, as they look what's happening to their local businesses. They're saying, you know, if this goes on, we will become impoverished. So the other thing to think about is to need to find new organizational forms. And people like Trevor Schultz and I know Keith have talked about platform cooperatives. That's one way. One could even think about the federal government, the national government taking over some of these activities and saying, we will provide them. For example, search. Maybe the federal government should take it over. Or, as I've recommended in Germany, where they have supervisory boards that include not only the business executives, but workers. Or you could think about perhaps some sort of advisory board with at Amazon with users and sellers, and then representatives of labor and representatives of management, to at least make decisions on, you know, should Amazon be allowed to charge higher percentage, higher fees, et cetera. So there are lots of different things that we need to be thinking about to sort of regulate these institutions so that they work not just for the betterment of themselves, but for society as a whole. At least that's sort of the principle that I've been working on and trying to put forward, is we need new ways of thinking about these organizational forms. Remember, in the same way as we reacted 150 years ago, 120 years ago to Standard Oil, or when we reacted to the rise of General Motors and Ford and those big corporations, we changed the legal system. We developed new antitrust regulations, right? So we may need to think of new regulatory mechanisms to regulate these organizations, not because they're bad, but because they have this motivation, and we need to increase their incentives and motivations to work in the for the social good. So with that, I'll end, and I really believe this, it is up to us and of course our political structures to think about ways to deal with this this new reality that every single one of us is embedded in today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Kenney. That was really great. You know, and this sets us up quite well for the next webinars. Just make sure that folks are aware of that before we hop into the Q&A. I'll just so you know, 2 weeks from now, we're going to have Matt Kropp. He's the co-executive director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center, and he's going to be talking about how we can generate capital from our communities for startups and new enterprise. So I think that's going to be a really important discussion. You know, Martin, real quick, one of the things I was thinking about here, you know, on one hand, I completely agree that these platform enterprise, they give us a lot of new tools in our toolbox for doing a lot of really great things. They reduce a lot of friction between the consumer and seller. And these are things I think we should be embracing. But as you notice, it's the structural component of like who owns it and what's their motivation is what's really going to be a problem behind this. And we still have ways to go regulatorily, competitively, before we get there to have a proper corrective. Just a broad basic question though is, think about, you mentioned car dealers, and where I'm from in central Illinois, those are the wealthy folks in the community, your local car dealers. And if they're going to get disrupted, that's going to be, frankly, hell for many of these small communities and the wealth generators there, I guess you could say. If the platforms are coming, how pervasive are the platforms for all of the other industries that are out there that they haven't touched yet?
So we actually did a paper that looked at all of the service SIC codes, which 540 different, that's car dealers, that's everything, grocery store, whatever, right? And we found that directly or indirectly, 60% of those sectors had a platform already in the sector, either directly or indirectly affecting it. So Yelp is indirect, right? You don't buy and sell over Yelp. It gives you recommendations. But it still extracts advertising money and pushes restaurants and others to do that. So we found 60% of all of the SIC codes and services, which is by far the largest part of the economy, already had a platform. Let me give you an example. My mother has a very small apartment building under management. Today, renters don't drive around the neighborhood and find it. Don't look at the classified ads. They go online to apartments.com or something like that. And when we have a vacancy, we have to advertise on there. Okay, that's fine. But what have we seen every year? The price that we pay to put an ad on the platform increases. Now, their costs have not increased, but they can squeeze us. Now, say, well, you say it's just a little bit of money. Let's say it's $60 on $1,000 rental, $1,000 a month rental, $12,000, $60. Next year it's 75. Next year it's 100, right? And if you either keep raising rent, if you can't raise the rent to make up for this, then you have to eat it. Now, I'm not saying cry for the apartment owner. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that is an example of the power once the platform is intermediating the relationship and you have to go through the platform. So this is across all sectors, right? And in each case, it's a way of extracting more. Now you say, oh, well, it's $10 more, but $10 across all apartments in the United States that are rented every year, and that's real money. And next year you squeeze another 10 out, and either that gets passed on, as I said, to the renter, or it's out of that local, often local, they're not all local apartment owner. And again, I'm not defending apartment owners as a poor, oppressed class of people. In the same way as an Uber driver. If you look at the beginning of Uber, it was a pretty good deal for the drivers. Today, for the drivers, it's much more difficult, particularly if they'd like to be full-time, like the taxi cab driver was. So that gives you an example. So the pervasiveness allows little taxes on everything. And particularly after the market is tipped and everybody goes to apartments.com and nobody drives around looking for an apartment anymore.
And then many of these big corporations are able to have a large cash hoard that they could direct at the next big buyout or what have you. I just saw in the news the other day that Amazon is going to be doing a test hair salon in London. So you kind of asked the question of what do they know that we don't know? Why are they playing around with hair salons? Or is it just that they've got the money and they can test it and see if it flies? And if you're running a hair salon now, you've got to be concerned.
So, right, you're absolutely a great point. They have so much capital now that they can do experiments and see if they work or they don't work. If they don't work, they just back off. Okay, so lose $20 million. It's nothing.
So small and medium enterprise really need to be aware of what's coming up on the horizon here and be prepared.
Small and medium enterprises, and I insisted in the Sloan Management Review article, they wanted to take out my and our colleagues demand that that small and medium enterprises engage with their political leadership to express the problems that they are facing from the platforms and push the political leadership of this country to consider perhaps their voters, the small and medium businesses, and there's so many of them, versus the Amazons and the Googles, and ensure and pressure these platforms to think about small and medium enterprise and not to squeeze them.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So let's make sure we address a few of the questions from the audience.
Yes.
So Martin, up first, an anonymous attendee says, eventually with platforms like Google, should we classify them as public utilities, prevent them from discriminating? What's your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, so my thought on a great question, and that is certainly one way to go. And I certainly support exploring that as a way to regulate them. That may not be the only way. As I've talked about, perhaps you could get the government to start to support platform cooperatives a la Trevor Schultz to really put money and pressure behind it to declare some of these vital infrastructure like the water system, which in San Diego and in most places is owned by the city. So owned in some way by the national government or something. So there are many different forms that we could think about: a regulatory form versus an ownership form versus a subsidization of competition. All of those might be possible. And I think because platforms are different than the water utility systems, the traditional utilities we think of, we need to do a lot of thinking and research and planning as to how we would structure that to get the result that we as a society would want. But absolutely, a public utility model for them absolutely needs to be considered very seriously at the highest levels of our country. And if you listen to Lena Khan yesterday in her testimony before the Senate, she talked about that, and that question was asked, and she said that's something we need to look at. So yes, absolutely, and thankfully people are starting to become aware that that is an alternative model.
I think that demonstrates just how powerful these firms are, that it's becoming an open conversation in Washington, D.C. It's been years since we've had these kind of conversations. I think since I was a kid, perhaps. With that, Martin, we have a good question from David Thompson. David Thompson is someone who I know that's a legend in the cooperative sector. And he asked, how do cooperatives access the amount of capital and pay the needed return to launch competitors to the market funded private corporations?
David, that is just an absolutely great question, particularly when the private market can subsidize losses like it did with Amazon or with Uber or with Airbnb for years and years and years and years. Whereas a cooperative at the minimum doesn't have a lot of capital, has to break even because it can't take just, years of losses. And this is why I brought up the possibility of the government saying that some of these other models are a public good and therefore need to be subsidized. We buy the military. I mean, if that's a public good, we subsidize, highways. Why would we consider subsidizing alternative organizational forms because of the kinds of things that they do that are good for the community, right? And let me give you a kind of an example. For many years, the United States pushed in Japan to have big box stores because they protected small little retailers that were inefficient. They were inefficient. However, if you go to Japan, every morning that mama papa-san, they go out and they sweep the street around their store, get the garbage and throw it in their can or something, and now you have a clean street. And it's kind of a nice street. You got all these little mama papa shops, tofuyas, et cetera, et cetera. this is a subsidy, but it's for a good. But it's a good that's not counted in the profit loss column. So I think your question is the great question. Could we think about subsidizing cooperatives, cooperative platforms, and the government just subsidize them because they're good? It doesn't mean they could be inefficient or useless, but to develop that alternative to the Amazons of this world. I try to buy things outside Amazon, books and things like that. It's almost impossible. I have to pay $3 or $4 more per book, which I won't do. But maybe there's a good to that should be subsidized, so that it can compete with Amazon. And Amazon should be taxed too, of course, which is another difficult issue.
That's right.
So it's a great question. We have to get our thinking, broaden our thinking of what is the public good. And do we have to pay for it? But should we have to pay for it collectively? Because each of us as individuals finds it hard to pay that way because we're so price sensitive.
And just to mention for the audience too, there is this movement. Some of my colleagues, like Nathan Schneider out of Boulder, have put together called Exit to Community, where we encourage new startups, especially platforms, to structure themselves as stakeholder-owned cooperatives. So like that's one thing. Another is there are parallels of what's occurred in the past. The amazing American electric cooperative sector. It would not be here had it not been for cheap capital provided by the federal government. However, those monies were paid back with interest. And these are the kinds of innovative policies. These were done in the 1930s, 1940s. We're not talking about today. These would be phenomenal to be applied to what we're facing in our current moment. Another question here, Martin, is does Dr. Kenney consider web hosting, cloud services, and similar services offered by these firms, such as Amazon Web Services, part of the platform economy in his research? You just got queued up on this one.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because in the classical sense of the term, AWS is not a platform in the sense that you buy that, you're not transacting across it in some way. But of course, in another sense, it is a platform upon which so many businesses are built, right? And so you have, and you're having not a monopoly, but an oligopoly in this space. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM's going away, Oracle's going away in this space. So it is becoming increasingly oligopolized. And of course, the wonderful thing, and this is what AWS and Jeff Bezos saw, was that he had built all this infrastructure. Why not monetize it and start to sell his infrastructure to others? And so AWS is one of the first, but fulfillment by Amazon, all those Amazon trucks running around are more logistics and infrastructure that is built that Amazon trucks not only deliver, as Amazon products that Amazon sells, but it also delivers the products that vendors on Amazon sell. So in a strict sense of the term about a platform, two-sided market, AWS is probably not a platform in that sense. But in another sense of the term, something that others build upon and use, we would consider AWS or Azure or Google as platforms. And certainly as part of their business, their overall platform business, AWS, as you know, is highly profitable and was used to cross-subsidize other parts of Amazon that were less profitable or not profitable. It was a great question.
And Martin, David Thompson has another comment, and then I'll follow up with a question. And if folks have final questions, we're down to the last 5 minutes. So please put your questions here and I'll see if we can get to them before time ends. But David Thompson notes, after World War I, the Swiss government taxed all profits in any war-related industries and made that capital available to projects that were good for the community. A novel idea. A great groundbreaking housing co-op in Basel was built with this capital. So I thought that was a really great comment. One of the things I was curious about, Martin, was that in the work that I do, I'll go out to all these communities all over the United States, and particularly rural marginalized communities. And I see that they keep falling back on standard economic development paradigms, which, look, if you can get a good factory doing attraction retention, if you can get a good factory that's going to employ 1,500 residents, then do it. Like, that's, I get it. However, a lot of these same factories are now wanting the same incentives, if not more, and they're employing 50 people instead of 1,500 people. A question I had for you is, in your mind, what role does municipal, state, and federal economic development policy play in the growth of these platforms?
Well, so I mean, it's hard to say whether, well, of course, we do find local governments giving tax rebates for an Amazon warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
That's dramatic, particularly the Inland Empire. There's a lot of that, sort of Riverside County, San Bernardino Rivers. Of course, as my good friend Richard Florida says, all of those tend to be races to the bottom. And Amazon's going to locate in the Inland Empire anyway because of the freeway confluences, et cetera, et cetera. So I think local governments need to be very careful when the platform is offering them something. It's harder to think about how could we redirect consumer spending away from an Amazon with its convenience, et cetera, to the local, a local store, a local platform, a local whatever. I haven't been able to figure that out, but it would seem to me in Europe, I think the consumer cooperatives, I think, have been holding their own against the Amazons, but probably those consumer cooperatives are more a grocery type of cooperatives. And it could be just the nature of Europeans being more conscious of these issues than Americans. But how I just don't have a good answer for that. And therefore, I think perhaps maybe the utility model, perhaps with a subsidy model, as you pointed out, rural electric cooperatives and telephone were subsidized. And the agricultural sector is being platformized right now also through a John Deere, and I won't talk about that, I've been writing about that, but it's a great question, and I'm not very good at answering it.
Well, we're coming up on time, and Professor Kenney, thanks so much for this. This has been phenomenal, really appreciate it. To the audience, if you can, please do fill out the evaluation survey. That's going to help us tailor these webinars going forward to our economic development community and people that would benefit from these. So it's vitally important. But otherwise, thank you again, Professor Kenney. This is going to be posted online. People are going to be able to get recordings. And if they're open access, we're going to put up some of your publications as well so people can read further.
Thank you, Keith. I think this issue is one of the most important issues that we as people concerned about our society face. And I encourage you, all of you, to get involved in trying to push us in a more positive direction. Thanks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And we'll be back here in 2 weeks. Look for further announcements. Much appreciated.
Thanks. See ya.
See ya. Bye.